In the summer of 2024, 12 of the greatest minds in the history of video game development, design, and theory gathered in the woods of Southern Oregon to discuss the modern gaming industry and the emergence of artificial intelligence technology. This is a series of conversations between old friends, old men now, men who have shaped the gaming world as we know it today, and whose innovations will continue to influence how we play for generations to come. Episode 1, Introductions. What have you been up to since the turn of the century?
Of course, man, I got it. I left again. I started a racing team called Rattlesnake Electric Sport, which we can talk more about. Somebody tells me it's the winningest EV racing team in the world. Wasn't the plan, but that's what happened. I went to Amazon. I made a game based on the Grand Tour show. I shipped it on time, and then I shipped 14 updates on time, all which were things that Amazon had no idea what to do with. So they asked me to go work with the Twitch guys and start a channel to help Amazon Prime. So I started a channel called The Crown Channel, which in July of 2019 was the #1 English language channel on the platform, somehow. Let's see. And then I retired from hockey after having my best scoring season ever as a hockey player and missing half the games because it took me so long to recover from injury at my old age. I left Amazon. I bought a guitar company called Alembic Guitar that was founded by the Grateful Dead, which is a story longer than we have right now to talk about. And I have, in the last 2 years, started a company called Clean Play with David Helgeson from Unity. That's about reducing the carbon footprint of the video game business to zero as a profitable activity. We can talk more about that later. I use my 5 minutes.
Oh. Am I going next?
Yep.
My gosh. So it's hard to know where to begin. I've gone through so many different experiences. Well, so I started In Exile, which is the company I have now, in 2002. Of course, I had ran Interplay for 17 years and left that company, which was strange because it was my identity. So it was kind of that was who I. And then you're blank slate. You also learn who your friends were, like the people that wouldn't call you back anymore. You're like, nah, E2 Brute, and so it took about a decade to kind of find my way to what business model can I do to survive, because things were changing very quickly. It was mostly be a developer for a publisher, kind of during those times. Digital distribution was just coming on with Steam and with iOS, and then of course we did some iOS games. We did Line Rider. We did Fantastic Contraption. We had a couple of #1 hits on iOS, but I knew it wasn't repeatable. I never got excited because I felt like, oh my God, there's so much stuff coming out. So I didn't really lean into that. Free to play wasn't a thing. It wasn't anything I was into. And so we did some work for some publishers. I really wanted to get back to doing role-playing games. But I couldn't get interest because in the old days with Ritual, most of the publishers were all in the same business. You'd pitch a game to 5 different publishers, one would pick it up. But then it was we do licensed product, we do unlicensed product, we only do billion-dollar franchises, we only do mobile. So now you're pitching one-on-one because they were such diverse. So I'm like, well, that's not good. And of course, when I'd go pitch, there were thousands of small groups bringing them titles that were already prototypes running. Well, why go with Brian's papers when I can play their prototype? So that's not a good business. I'm not going to spend prototypes for $500,000. So that's when Kickstarter, thank God, saw Tim Schafer's thing. That's it. This is our chance. Hail Mary here. And so, we funded it. And that, we had the Way Sun, trademark back. Long story. I won't get into that either. And so, people got behind us. It was probably one of the highlights of my career, that the recognition for my body of work. Because there's Brian, a publisher's here's a 40-page contract and all the ways we're going to sue you if you don't deliver. Here's my fans saying, we trust you. Here's the money up front, no strings attached.
No, they love you, not just they trust you,
yeah,
they love you.
Yeah, and so that was really one of the highlights. And so then Parlay, and then we started doing more role-playing games. And then, there's a million more stories besides that. But, of course, Microsoft bought us about 4 years ago. And so that was really the first time I said, now I'm actually back to why I got in this business to begin with, because I used to read books and play games and make games, but I had to be a CEO and buy companies and sell companies and go public and do all the stuff that I hated, but someone had to do it. And so now I don't have to do any of that, and I'm back to making games, and it's awesome. So I'm actually having more fun than I've had in a long time. So that's my quick one.
Okay, I guess as the century dawned, I was still running Stormfront Studios that I ran from 88 to 2008, and working at AAA, third-party studio. In 2008, we had put all of our apples into a bushel on an original IP that we co-owned with a publisher who subsequently got acquired, so everybody knows that it's Vivendi. And kind of a dream project, original IP, next gen, all the things you have on your checkoff list. And then Vivendi got acquired, and everything that wasn't within 90 days of shipping was shot. And we had put over $1 million into getting that deal because it was such a dream deal. And so that was enough to take, with the way 2008 was going, that was enough to take us out. So at that point, I transitioned to being a consultant, which I'd never actually done before, formally. And ended up, it's interesting, I actually like the role, I still do it. I actually like the role because some of the jobs are not particularly fun. A big corporation knows what they need to do with their team. They don't want to take responsibility. They call you in to write a detailed report on the functioning of their operations. There's an obvious next step. You detailed this obvious next step. By golly, I'm so surprised. How could this be? And very, very much like an absurdist play, they then discover the next step because you told them. They then take it, removing their responsibility, and they pay you and you go off. But the fortunate part of it is I have not done very many of those, but you get involved with the teams, and the teams are going, finally somebody who wants to talk to us and will actually listen. And I actually built friendships out of some of those gigs that have maintained just because we were sitting there going, tell us what's going on. We're walking here cold here, but we're told there's issues. Tell me what you think. And then you just sit and you listen. And so I discovered that the part of consulting, finding the next gig, is the part we all know we don't like. The part I like is being able to be a listener as a profession. That is a cool thing. That's a good feeling, because if you're listening, what comes next, if you've done this a long time, all of us, if you listen very often, what comes next is pretty clear. And so I like that part. For 15 years, I've advised the Strong Museum on their video game functions, and occasionally other aspects of games. I have loved that. I was saying to Chris earlier, all of we are part of the media. We're all part of the beast. Those guys are devoted only to the history of games. And it was the first time I realized that there was somebody involved in chronicling history who was not also part of the story. And they didn't need to be part of the story. The idea that they had to become important players in the story other than as preservers in the story is so refreshing. I've told people I taught as an adjunct for 4 years at Claremont Graduate University in the Department of Education in the 70s, before I went to work for a television, and which also gave me 4 more years of mainframe computer access to write games. I saw more politics in 2 weeks at the graduate school that I've seen at 15 years at the museum, because they're people about the mission, and the people at the top understand how to do this. So I also have worked on my own projects. I did one game design for a media company who believed their brand was so important that no one was getting credit for it, but it ran successfully for 7 years. So, and if I'm still this vague about it, you can imagine the contract I signed, but I needed the money. So that was an interesting project. I'm currently working, not announced, not disclosed, I'm currently working, designing a baseball board game. I've done a few baseball
It's called
games.
full circle, buddy.
Yeah, really, really. And that I'm actually very excited about. We're going to Kickstarter it, I think, probably for next baseball season. Got a great partner I'm working with who's a great guy. And so amongst the other things I'm doing between the project to consult in and the museum and the baseball game, I'm having a great time.
Don, were you a Stratomatic or an ATBA guy growing up?
I have a terrible confession. I knew it would come up. I knew it. I was an all-star baseball guy. Yes, it's true. We didn't have pitching. We only had batting. We didn't have pitching in our board games. Imagine a baseball board game that does batting great, but is a simulation, doesn't have pitching. 2,500.
You were impressionable.
Yeah, I was young and impressionable. 2,500 box scores kept still somewhere in storage of playing that game. But
So you and Brian have in common this, problem with pitching. Where's Meretzky when I need my?
He actually was lost. He texted he was lost.
Well, I had the pitching, I just didn't like it. Okay, I mean, to be fair,
No, that's true.
I could do it.
You actually had pitching.
Yeah.
So basically, it comes down to is I've been working on the same game for 53 years.
Yeah, we all do.
Yeah, I'm trying to catch up to Don. I'm not quite at 50 years. 47. But turn of the century, what was I doing? I was working on Ultima Online. I was involved in the fiasco called EA.com, more deeply than I ever cared to be. And when EA finally decided it's time to kill Origin, I moved over and worked on Maxis on Sims Online. Another, I think every career should have like one major disaster. I think that was my major disaster. Only one? Only one. Well, I mean, one major, one big one. One big one. Not I got a few smaller ones.
Like Tycho Crater on the Moon.
And I think, but all those things are instructive, right? So they're instructive on the challenges of making, all of our challenges of making games are really, how do we get games made in the context that we are in all the time? The political, company, fiscal context, everything conspires against games being made. Everything conspires against games being made. All of us have probably seen games that should have been made or were made and never made it out the door, that because all the externals stop it versus what the
Sometimes just the calendar.
yeah, it's just everywhere. And after that, I went and worked at Sony Online, and I was doing a Wasteland-like MMO that got canceled so that we could all pile on to Star Wars Galaxies right after it shipped. And I got to run that for a couple of years. That was fun. And then I got out of there, and then Rich got out a little bit later. And then we said, well, there's probably 3 companies in the world that probably need to be doing MMOs that aren't. One of those was BioWare, and they ended up grabbing us, and we started what later became Star Wars: The Old Republic. So I worked on that for 7 years. Another, never say never about EA. It's one of my new rules. You just don't know. You just don't know. So I never say never. About that. That was fun, but grueling, right? So literally an ocean liner of a game.
Yes.
World War I, trench warfare, slogging, many casualties.
You and I had lunch during that period at one point, and you said, we got to stop making these aircraft carrier games.
Yeah.
And I said, Gordon, we're making an aircraft carrier game.
I know. After that, I went to Disney for a couple of years and worked on social. They brought me in to actually do a little MMO-ish social thing. And it's funny, our prototype was super fun. And then when we made the game, it wasn't as fun. Mm-hmm. Like the actual making it work as a game took all the fun out of it. But that thing was a clusterfuck.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to hear how that happened. But
but the whole Playdom thing was a clusterfuck, right? It was a big roll-up to get Disney to buy it. Disney still couldn't integrate anything that was, the culture clash between core Disney, which is foolish in my mind. Disney is all about customer experience, and there's no reason why we couldn't be part of that, but it just it's never meant to be, it seems like. I just don't understand it.
Well, Disney
But-
screwed up the interactive thing 3 or 4 times, even in the 80s and 90s.
I know this. I knew this was like fourth wave already, and
EA has twice bought assets from Disney when they shut down.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah, and Disney, whatever they're doing now is the first time they've ever done it.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Anybody has ever.
Yeah.
And then, following some people who'd already done some Kickstarter stuff, I got out of Disney and I said,
We saved the chair for you.
it's been 20 years or more since I did a
very
startup. Those brain cells have died. It's time to do another startup. So I partnered up with a guy in Austin, and we started a company, and we built a mobile game like in 6 months. And every month we were building it, the cost of promoting the mobile game was going up month by month, right? And by the time we finished the mobile game, we go, oh, we need twice the money we spent to build the mobile game to actually bring it to get its number, test it and get its numbers right. So it was like, oh, this is stupid, and of course there was a million other people doing the same thing. And so we said, well, we have a little bit of money left. We should pivot and we know how to do an MMO. We know how to get customers for an MMO without spending this gigantic amount of money. Why don't we do that? And we'll go out and do a Kickstarter. But we looked and like the first wave of Kickstarters had all ended, right? And the ones that were coming after that were not getting funded because the rules had changed on Kickstarter. You had to have a prototype. You had to have video. You had to have, you couldn't do it on paper anymore. So we did that. We did a 6-month, built a prototype and had a very successful Kickstarter. And then was able to raise money on the back of that Kickstarter because we have marketplace. So then, 7 raises later, we shipped the game. The game failed, as they do. But it was, and they got sold off to Monumental. And I went there for a little while. And then Raph, was, what's the right way to put it? Raph was really encouraging me to come join him. Is that the way to put it? And I joined Raph at Playable Worlds for the last couple of years, working on his Metaversity and memo. So
Raph has the enthusiasm of the first time.
every time. Yeah. Anyway, it's been fun. Is what I'd say. I've gotten to do things which I thought were important and some things that were fun to do, and works with a ton of great people. And that's what I mostly build. So I don't really build games. I build teams that build games. That's my real job. Yeah.
Welcome, Steve.
Thank you. Welcome. Sorry to be late.
Steve, who?
Turns out the email that I would have sworn was named address was named location.
I visited the neighbors.
We did appreciate the yes, no. That was
That was
good.
That was our second try
That's
of getting
pretty
the right
clear,
turn off this road, and it was encouraging.
It was terrible because all I wanted to do was go the no route.
That's right. We're in the
Contrarians here.
You tell me I can't go there. Now I definitely want to go down there.
Sid, the explanation here is that there's a fork in my driveway, and we don't want people going one way, so I put a sawhorse with 2 big signs. One said yes, pointing that way, and the other said no, pointing the other. So,
And boy, will people be upset when he publishes the errata this afternoon.
We love our binary choices, right? We love our
There we go. That's right. 1 and 0 would have sufficed.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
oh, yeah, I
That
should
would have
have.
worked. You were so loquacious.
I'm Steve Meretzky, for those I haven't met. So we're just talking this century?
Yes.
Yeah. So let's see. As the century dawned, I was just finishing up a horrible and unproductive gig at THQ. And in 2000, I started working at a startup called World Winner, making basically, what came to be considered skilled tournament games or cash tournament games. Mostly small casual games, but basically played in a tournament model. And I was there for just about 5 years. And we never used the term, but basically we were inventing the free-to-play model. So that was very exciting times. It was really my first experience with kind of live service games of any kind. And then in 2005, I left there and joined a startup that was being run by Paul Nuras. And it was making mobile games, pre-smartphone mobile games, and that was horrible. Nothing Paul's fault, really. The fault of the hardware and the mobile ecosystem at that time. Then I joined Blue Fang for about a year, the makers of Zoo Tycoon, working on a follow-up game that ended up coming out after I left called World of Zoo. And then in 2008, Eric introduced me to the founders of a startup called U+, that would soon be renamed Playdom, making games for MySpace and starting to make games for Facebook. And I joined them and stayed about 5 years working on social games for Facebook. We got acquired by Disney. Spent the last 2 years there working on a very large, ambitious game using Disney IP, a park building game that ended up not coming out. Long, very painful story. Studio got shut down. Playdom got shut down. Let's see, what are we now? 2013, I joined GSN and spent a couple years working on social casino games. And that was surprisingly interesting. Very, very weird and interesting subgenre. And then basically GSN decided to mostly offshore all of their operations. They bought a studio in Ukraine, they bought a studio in India, and basically phased out almost all of their US operations. And at that point I joined King, and opened a studio in San Francisco to write games for Facebook Messenger. And did that for about a year and a half until King rightly decided that that market wasn't really turning into anything interesting. And they shut down our studio, and then they, shortly thereafter, shut down all North American development in San Francisco and Seattle. And then for about 3 years, I just did a lot of miscellaneous contract work, including some work for Playable Worlds. And kind of it looked like maybe I was gradually drifting into retirement. And then about 2 years ago, I got in touch with Tony Goodman, who had a company in Texas called People Fun that had been acquired by AppLovin. And they were looking for a head of design. And I ended up joining them and kind of ran an innovation pod, developing a lot of miscellaneous, basically casual mobile game ideas. And then after about 6 months of doing that, we decided to move one of them into production. And I've been leading that team, and that game is now in soft launch. It's called Wordscape Solitaire, and it's doing quite well, and it's slated for worldwide release in about a month.
I am Paul Ritchie, and most of the interesting things I've done happened last millennium. But so starting at the year 2000, I was working with Crystal Dynamics. We had a studio called Toys for Bob, and we were in Nevada, and we were trying to figure out what sort of games to make for the new version of Crystal Dynamics, which really pretty much wanted to do Tomb Raider repeatedly. So we proposed a lot of really exciting games. One called Alien Probe, which was about 4 aliens from the 50s trying to invade the Earth. They were completely behind technology, so they invade a small town called Petaluma. And pretty much it's about these bumbling aliens simply trying to conquer a small town, facing off against like the science professor from the high school. And anyway.
When I hear Alien Probe, by the way.
Oh, the cover of the design document. I love paper design documents. Like that's my jam. Was this great drawing of this little alien holding this horrible thing. So anyway, that shot down immediately.
I would have greenlit that.
Oh, thank you. I own the IP. Let's do it. And so then there was a whole bunch of the worst pitch of my life, actually, was in London. And I went in with this idea called Minions, which was about you and these fun little creatures you would collect. And you would have a team of these creatures you could switch between. And it was beautiful. And we decided that all of the written words were not getting read in our design documents. So it would be a picture book of what the game was like. And it was just this beautiful picture book. Got there, sat down with the guys, all of the Tomb Raider guys, and they said, so we hear that you're making a sequel to The Horde. And I looked at the head of the Crystal Dynamics like, the fuck? And I said, that's a great idea. Today, though, that just got worse from there. Holy cow, that was bad. And then, so after pitching a couple of other miserable, like, realistic, violent things that I could never quite pull off, got a call like 3 days before Christmas. Hey, Paul, really glad to, lay off your team and you're fired. And but I discovered that is the best time in the world, because if you can possibly save them $1, you can take your whole team with you. So I took the majority of my team with me, and then for odd reasons, all of my equipment and all of the IP that they had canned, which is why I have Sterilizer or Alien Probe. So anyway, founded a new company called Toys for Bob, which was a corporation. Fred Ford and I, who had founded the original one in '88, were still running it, had 14 people then, and we had got a contract with Activision to do anything, which it turns out was they had a Disney deal go sour. So out of that, they got 3 licenses that they could build one game out of. So they gave us the Tony Hawk engine and Toy Story, Tarzan, and the Lion King, and said, go. And so we made Disney's Extreme Skating Adventure. I think there were more words in it. But I got to know Dan Winters out of it, and Lou Priori at Disney. And Dan Winters, I don't know how you guys felt about him, but he was one of my favorite people. Really one of the most solid and helpful human beings I ran into. And I miss him. Anyway, so out of that, Activision decided, wow, you guys like to make kids games. Ignoring everything we'd ever made before. Okay, so now we're the kids game company. Great, we're up to about 40. And we start with, do you want to do Madagascar? I'm like, well, you're doing Madagascar. Okay, we're doing Madagascar. So we did this, and we had been evolving our own internal engine, which was designer focused. So our designers were doing all of the interactive scripting, all of the layout and composition, and the programmers were just making tools. And that continued for quite a long time. And it allowed designers and in fact almost everybody in the company to prototype gaming on the side, which turns out to be better and good later in the story. So we do a couple of Madagascars. We do another Tony Hawk game for kids, which was one of the early Wii games. And the Madagascar games are doing okay. The other ones are just barely paying for themselves. But we're staying alive, and I'm working for a guy named Dave Stoll. Activision buys us in 2005, which was awesome, because then I didn't have to worry about payroll, which was hard, because it didn't let me think about fun things like going underground and killing monsters and getting treasure, which is my metaphor for life. So, which again, first part of the 20th century or second part, that's way more interesting. But, okay, so get a call from my boss, Dave Stoll, who I loved, and he says, hey, Paul, the movie kids game market has died, and you need to do something else. So what we need you to do is make a game for kids on the Wii. It has to be the most successful one of all time, because that's not a very successful market, or else. Yeah, okay. So, and I'm sitting in I'm somewhere in Scottsdale, Arizona at a hospital hanging out with my dad, and I'm having this conversation. So I call up Fred and say, Fred, get everybody together. We have about 80 people now, and tell them to basically put on their thinking caps. I'm coming back. And so we sat down as a company and said, all right, and I laid it out. This is the deal. We're going to get shut down if we don't come up with something crazy good. And there's no reason not to pitch the most bizarre, exciting thing we can, because what's the worst that can happen? We can get shut down. So we had 3 pitches. And we also, they said, hey, we got purchased by a company, or maybe we bought them. It's unclear. They've got all this IP. Do you want to use any of it? And we look at it and we're like, yeah, we want to use Spyro the Dragon. So we pitched the Spyro hat game, which was all about using peripherals, which were hats, these cool Spyro hats, and they interpreted jumping around and motion And the game was you and this other person jumping around to make Spyro fly. That did not work, and also people hit their heads on things. The next one was called We Fat, because we decided that all of the so We Fit things were living in closets now. They've been huge. They'd all gone in the closet. We said, screw that, we can use those. So Spyro is fat. He can't even fly anymore. And it's so sad. So what you have to do is convince Spyro, you're like his coach. Come on, Spyro, let's exercise. So you convince him to lose weight, and he flies. And then he said, this is wrong in so many ways. So of all three of the ideas, they picked the next one, which was, hey, we think I jokingly applied for a patent with Activision for three things, one of which was toys that represented your avatar. You would put them on this portal, and an RFID communication would tell the game you've changed characters, and you would become that. And there's a longer reason why it's a joke. There's another reason why I have a patent called GPS game. There's a patent there, totally not useful. But anyway, so we pitched that one, and they say, well, have you ever made toys before? And I said, yes, because I have cast rubber monsters. They're ugly, they're horrible, but I love rubber monsters. Errol Otis, my old friend, I blame him. We have this brilliant character artist named Yue Wang, and he says, yeah, I can totally sculpt anything out of Sculpey. So we make a factory on our big counter at the office where he has sculpted characters, and I have made the molds, and we've got everybody casting this stuff in hard plastic and painting them by hand so that we can have like 10 sets of toys. I think it was 4 in each set. And with RFIDs in them, and we build this like glowing portal thingy. And really, all that happens is you have a dragon that can swing his tail around in a circle and kill a bunch of orcs, essentially. But you can switch between these characters. A dragon that swings his tail, a troll that throws grenades for some reason. And that was compelling. But what we really did was we gave the toys to the kids of the executives. So we targeted not the executive decision makers, but basically their kids. And they loved the toys, and they bugged their parents. So I think that's why the game got made, because it made no sense to do it. We really had never made toys. But there was another thing. Guitar Hero had gone down, and they had this huge plastics manufacturing pathway. And so they said, oh, well, yeah, we can make lots of plastic toys. So anyway, to make a long story short, we made this thing called Skylanders Spyro's Adventure, which was about 3 toys came in the box, Spyro and 2 other characters. There was a nice kind of Diablo for kids game. And then our real thing was we wanted to sell a lot of other toys. And that ended up working far, far better than anybody thought. We sold about 300 million toys. And I got to learn about toy manufacturing in China factories, which is grisly and real. And then everybody else, we got like 3 years where we were all by ourselves. We had that blue ocean. And then the sharks arrived, and Disney showed up, kind of replicating our game pattern, but with the greatest IP in the world, like all of it. And that was pretty much trouble. And then Lego showed up and did pretty much the same thing, but they had Lego, which is like one of the most awesome games in the world, entertainments. And then Nintendo showed up as well. So we thrashed around and tried a bunch of things. At the end, we'd had custom 3D printed toys on demand, interactive cards, this whole like entertainment through traditional physical mail, which I still think is a neat idea. And then all of our businesses, Disney's business, Lego's business, hit this wall, which was essentially the inventory from the previous year hadn't sold. We crammed in a bunch more inventory. There was a huge amount of inventory in there. The next year, all of our toys bounced off every, Toys R Us, Walmart, all of the big stores. And that was the end of a very fun run. And so meanwhile, I'd been running Toys for Bob. We were up to like 150 people now, plus a couple hundred people in other studios from time to time. And I was doing nothing fun. And the second go round of layoffs, so then it was like, well, what are you guys going to do next? We pitched some other ideas. None of them really turned out. So there was another round of layoffs, and Fred and I just sort of looked at each other and said, this is not fun. We've been training our replacements. So how about we just hand it over and we'll go make the sequel to Star Control 2 again. And that's what we had been wanting to do for a while. There was a crazy lawsuit that happened, which I don't really want to talk about. It was horrible. Like one of the most horrible experiences of my life. And I had prostate cancer at the same time. And that lawsuit was worse.
From the outside, my empathy to you was huge.
Oh,
you really went through it. So my heart, honestly.
And I was,
looked hard.
oh, thank you. I was at King in Stockholm when I said to Fred, we have to get out of this lawsuit. It's killing me on every conceivable level. And we concocted a way to do it that involved honeybees. But I had a fun time with the King guys anyway. So that then leads to me and Fred saying to Activision, stop paying us a lot of money, which may have been a mistake, and instead let us leave and don't shut down our studio. And that took some convincing. And eventually they said, okay, but you have to stay in the corner for a year. And literally, we had this awesome studio completely made of tiki everything. And we had this like corner. And we were really not supposed to talk to anybody, but there was like break glass in case of disaster, extra studio heads here. So Fred and I worked on prototypes, one of the things over my 5 minutes was typical. I'd love to hear all of the games that your guys failed, but you really wish you could finish them. Like, because I want to tell my story. But I think that would be great to hear what your favorite game is. By the way, you inspired me tremendously. Just want to say thank you. And so at the end, went off to work on the sequel to Star Control, which I can't call Star Control, it's the Iroquois Masters. And started out very aligned, got somewhat unaligned, decided I didn't want to keep working on that, although I got the story all done. Now I'm looking for a job. So if any of you know of jobs for a Paul Ritchie, talk to me after the show. And I still love making games. I still play D&D with Errol Otis, who I played D&D with in 1976 and how I got into this whole business. And generally, life is awesome.
No disrespect, but I'm grabbing your knees.
So let's see. I've been freelance design since '96, and this century splits kind of cleanly into two equal parts. So the first 12 years continued to do all sorts of freelance stuff. I worked on my first serious game before it was even called Serious Games in I think '99, and got more and more interested in that sort of thing, but kept working on, whatever would come up. As Donna says, the whole freelance thing is difficult, but I found I have the right personality and also I think enough ADHD to just want to do 7 different things at once all the time, including in the midst of this first 12 years, I started doing more and more games for medicine stuff. The first one being a big one called Remission that was funded by the wife of the guy who started eBay. They've spent millions of dollars failing in really interesting ways I could talk about at some other point. But they did a good game that actually was helping kids with cancer. And that was like, wow, how great to do all the stuff I've had to learn to do for entertainment, and also add in, really big stuff that can help people in these ways that is very challenging from a design standpoint. And had a abortive startup with some of my old LucasArts friends called Suddenly Social. Just worked on a bunch of different things. But then it was around 2010, I got pulled into something through the head of brain imaging at UCSF, who had some friends at LucasArts, and he had this idea about doing some games for his medical stuff. And they said, oh, we know this guy who's been specializing. So I came in with them. And that became a prototype that got on the Journal of Nature, the scientific journal Nature, on the cover, the only video game they've ever put on the cover. And that in turn spawned a company called Achille, which raised hundreds of millions of dollars and then went public. And they went public in a SPAC, and they've just recently, a couple of weeks ago, been acquired for a fraction of what they went public for. So but they still have a game that is the only game that the FDA has now cleared for prescriptions. You can actually, doctors prescribe it. They just, also 2 or 3 weeks ago, the FDA cleared the over-the-counter version, so anybody can now get this game. It's been proven to be about as effective for ADHD as Adderall or Ritalin, but the 2 most serious side effects for the game are occasional headaches and frustration, which of course is pretty much every game.
Isn't that what we do all the time? You get a prescription before?
You needed a prescription. Now that was which explains part of the financial problems and getting
They
doctors
should
to
do that for
prescribe
free-to-play
games.
games.
But that was a really interesting thing. But then about 12 years ago, I got this offer to come and be the head of design at a 200-person studio within Google, within Android actually in Google, and we were going to build up this big studio and make games, and it was sort of modeled a little bit after the kind of stuff Nintendo does, where we would make really super high quality games, and but in Google's case, not so much to make money from the games, but they would give away the source code to all the Android developers and basically supercharge Android game development. And as you all know, that never quite happened, but I can tell that story over dinner, perhaps, of why they changed their mind on that. But gave me 4 interesting years at Google. And in the midst of that, I kept trying to kind of push Google to get interested in some of these games for medicine stuff, but that wasn't going anywhere. And I kept getting shunted into stuff farther and farther away from game design. So I left there in 2017 and have focused about 80-90% on games for health since then. And it's a really, really interesting, it reminds me of the industry in the 80s, and that nobody really knows what can be done or what the genres are or how it's possible. But Achille has shown that it's possible to really do it. And it turns out there are a lot of companies now that have tested games in various ways, and they almost always exceed expectations, particularly because there are all sorts of treatments that require having to do some boring or painful repetitive thing. And we're really good at figuring out how to get people to do stuff. In fact, one of the things that happens, I worked with a Swiss company called Mind Maze that does stroke rehabilitation games, because you have to do these really boring exercises over and over again, and it often is painful. Well, if instead of just raising your arm, you're now controlling an airplane flying through hoops. Turns out now we have to be really careful because people do it so much that they actually strain their muscles and overdo it. And so now we'd have to just, but we all know how to put an energy economy into things. Anyway, that's been really interesting. Just to give you a couple ideas of some of the other things that I'm working on now, there's a German company that has a VR treatment for nearsightedness that for hitting kids from 6 to about 15 may actually prevent them from being nearsighted, or at least reduce their need for glasses. That's fun. I also got to do a really big, I wrote a huge graphic novel and found some animators to artists to put that together for them. I'm working with a company now called Freestyle Plus / Mindless. There's sort of 2 different subsidiaries that was originally started by a coalition of a couple people, including Lin-Manuel Miranda, to do improv comedy stuff. And they are now doing improv comedy. They were starting to go to big companies and teach improv comedy techniques to their executives, which, obviously there are a lot of things you can learn about thinking on your feet and that sort of thing. Said, hey, what if we made this digital? And boy, that's been really fun because these guys are so good at what they do. And the improv people have this huge library of games and techniques they do that are all interpersonal, and they haven't been made digital. Turns out that large language models are really good at filling in. And if they hallucinate a little bit, like so many other things in games, it's like, yeah, we don't care if there are a few bugs, that's their features. Yeah. So that's been interesting. Another thing where there's a woman who likes to make cheese and chocolate. She's French. She makes really amazing cheese. And she's a psychologist and worked with Meta. And she got Sam Altman to put up a bunch of money to do a company that is bringing microbe-based things like Kefir and Cheese and whatever, with Fallen London, the text game model, with LLM-based coaches to help people overcome mood issues and basically, and it was just so bizarre. But she's super smart. She talks a million miles a minute. It's really hard to keep up with her. She's, and it's like with freelance, one of the great things is that you spread your bets. And I think it's really likely, because it's so weird, and she doesn't.
Cheese, chocolate, and LLMs is what I heard.
Well, and Fallen London, which is also not a particularly whatever. But
Fall in London or
Fallen London.
okay.
This is a game that's been around for 10 years that has a real cult following, but not big success. Anyway, the cult following, including this woman who really loves it. It's really fun working with all these different weird things, and it's really fulfilling doing games that are helping people in medicine. And then the final thing I'll add, and I've been doing, is that I'm now a grandfather to a 3.5-year-old girl and a 15-month-old boy. The other grandfather is Frank Lance, who many of you know, who was head of Zynga New York and made Drop 7 and Area Code before that in New York. His son, James, married my daughter, Mara. His son is also a game designer. Frank and James have a company business now. They're doing games for Netflix games. And as you can imagine, it's just, when my daughter, got interested in James first and got her boyfriend wants to be a game designer and programmer, we joked about the fact that it's a shame your first big relationship is that, because you're never going to find somebody else who I'll enjoy so much. And well, they're married. And so we have wonderful family things, and those grandkids, particularly the grandson at 15 months, is fascinated with screens and interacting with things, and, don't want to project too much, but a lot of interesting genes going into that. So I spend a lot of time.
Those kids don't have a chance.
Oh, yeah.
What I was going to say is they're going to end up being football players.
Well, I do kind of expect that our granddaughter may be the rebellious one, and the grandson will be all in like his dad and grandparents.
What Noah Lyons is that his daughter, when she was a teenager, said she was not going to ever get involved with the game design.
Yeah. I mean, she was studying psychology, and she thought, God, this is just so Freudian. How did I end up with this guy? Okay, so that's what I've been doing.
What's interesting what you were saying about improv. My current startup, our main AI whisperer, used to own a comedy club in Atlanta, and he did a lot of improv. And CMU, where I've gotten a lot of really good interns from, they have the interactive, design program. And one of the first things that all the people in the interactive design program have to take is improv. It turns out to be incredibly useful.
It's a really good connection.
Yeah. We did in the programs that we did for you guys.
Yeah.
I did improv at your program.
Mm-hmm. But let's see, 2000. 2000, we just released The Sims, February 2000. So then I went straight onto the train wreck with Gordon for Sims Online. Now, while we were doing that, I started up another team in the background, doing a lot of prototyping. First thing that eventually became Spore, shipped around 2008, something like that. Both of those teams were huge, like 150 people on the team, which really sucked, It's like you spend 3 hours meeting, 1 hour working. Whereas teams I was on, smaller teams, were like 3 hours working, 1 hour meeting, And I hated that ratio. So after Spore shipped, I left Electronic Arts, and I'd had this little thing in the background, Stupid Fun Club, which I'd met some people doing Robot Wars, Battle Bots, and we actually got a machine shop in Berkeley, and that's where we built our robots. But we were doing a lot of prototyping of various things. And so when I left EA, we kind of made the Stupid Fun Club official for several years. And we did prototyping of games, TV, toys. Really enjoyed the toy prototyping. We actually produced first season of a show for Current TV, 13 episodes, something called Bar Karma. It was a crowdsourced TV show. Filmed mostly in New York, so I was spending a lot of time in New York. The toy stuff, we made some really cool toy prototypes, but only one made it to market, which was basically, I redesigned an ant farm so it would give your kids nightmares. It was kind of like a cylinder, but there was a clear space over the top the ants would walk across to get their food and whatnot. But there was an LED light, a Fresnel lens, so it would
magnify it way back on your ceiling at nightlight. So you see these giant hands.
That's really cool.
But it actually went to the market. It's called the Farm Revolution. But I pitched a lot of games to EA because EA actually was funny. John Lee told us that let's try it. Looks fun. But there was, of course, the not invented here syndrome. So it's really hard to get a team at EA. We, prototype like the cat game, and the cat game was really cool. But a lot of the toys we prototyped were really cool. We had a really cool frisbee. Some stuff that was designed to be hung on the wall because kids' floors are always full of crap. The walls, if you can design a game or a toy that lives on the wall, that's what we spent a lot of time doing. Any rate, after about 5 years of that, I decided to kind of get back into really doing games. Been working on the current project right now for several years. It's called Proxy. The studio is called Gallium Studios. It's run by my very first producer from Brotterbund, Lauren Elliott, the guy who did Carmen Sandiego. So he's we've been working together for over 40 years. And it's amazing. We both still enjoy doing it. We don't really have to, but we're doing it because we enjoy it. But and we're going to try to keep it small. We're about 25 people right now, getting heavily into AI. So just trying to stay abreast of all the advances happening in AI right now, which is almost a full-time job. And then how to apply that to entertainment. And that's really kind of our main thing is, can we take AI? And you're right, when AI screws up, it's funny, in fact, that's probably the best use I've seen for AI right now is humor. It does humor great,
I love the hallucinations. It's my best up them.
Oh yeah, we took the guardrails off of some of these LLMs, and it got raunchy fast. But I was laughing my ass off, though. I mean, I laugh that hard when it goes off the rails.
6 figures is enough. 6 figures is enough.
Yeah, but anyway, so that's kind of what I'm up to.
Oh, okay. So at the turn of the millennium, I sort of my history has always been trying to figure out what the next type of game was. I had the privilege of doing the first 2 online game talks because everybody knew that nobody would want to play games with one another. And so around 2000, I said games are going to be played on mobile phones. And one of the reasons why I wanted to do this is I had been in London in 1999. Sorry to go back to the last century. And there were a billion text messages. And I said, I've worked with a lot of really bad interfaces, but something that requires you to hit the 7 key 4 times to get the letter S is a really hard interface. And I said, I don't know about you, but I use S in my correspondence all the time. The wisdom at GDC was that no one will ever want to play a game on the screen this small. And so I ended up being involved with the first wireless games set of talks, which were put in a ghetto, a track, because nobody would play games that small. Anyway, I ended up doing a lot of work with smartphones through the early feature phone era. The next thing I got involved with was free to play. I spent a fair bit of time in East Asia, actually just with companies in Japan, Korea, and China, because there were 2 things you could get there that you could not get in the US. One is free to play, but the other was a non-primitive wireless system and internet, because the Koreans and the Japanese had much more advanced systems than we had. Anyway, we got to the point where free to play around 2008, 2009, several colleagues who I will not name said, all right, Eric, free to play is an Asian thing, but it will never come here. But that was progress. I then went to social games with U+, which became Playdom. And while that was important, it was one thing I did not particularly enjoy, because the problem with so-called social games is the only thing that was social that mattered was Rich, tap Brian to play. And then those games did not care if you ever had another interaction. Around then, I went and made the switch, as Don did, to being, whether it's called an advisor or board member, I was functionally a consultant, because it was nothing more. I discovered a couple of things. Don, you're right that people will listen to you, but the amount of time that they will listen to you, you have a half-life, which is really short. And the other thing that was extraordinarily important to learn was I could come up with 100% perfect plan. By the way, I never have and I never will. But if the people did not listen to it, it didn't fucking matter. And it has been a pleasure to tell a story on Gordon, who I've had the privilege of being at least a partial or a full advisor to his companies. When he and Rich Vogel were starting on what became Star Wars: The Old Republic, I asked what was their most important goal, and they said to ship the game, because Gordon had the Sony game done. I walked it through with them. I said, all right, for you to do this, one of you is going to have to get fired. Rich turns green because he figures out by pattern recognition, I'm dead serious. And Gordon takes pity on him, saying, I've had practice being fired by EA. I will take them on. It is, the unfortunate thing is, Gordon did go through with that, did protect the company, but did not get to be there in the last year of shipping it. But Gordon, in terms of someone who acted on something that we discussed, you executed it beautifully and made for a better game.
Random mistake. You should go for you should think you should have 100% batting average if nobody ever blitzed.
Well, no, I mean, I could give another mistake. When I was advising Pullstring, I made a list of three designers they should get. I didn't include Rod, and I was lucky that they took Rod because I got the privilege of working with him for a brief period before that project got shot up. But the design sessions I had with Rod were a real pleasure because he was able to go back. He knew almost every game that I'd been involved with or played and enjoyed, and so we had the same. It was just a pleasure to do the same vocabulary. Anyway. Playdom gets a number of people who are here were involved with Playdom. I stopped being involved when it gets sold to Disney, since Disney doesn't seem to need any more directors. So I'm out of the picture. I then, I did that for about 15, 16 years. One of the most important themes was starting in 2008. I started working on kids apps and ed tech, which is just as brutal a field as two of you said. But it was extraordinarily important because my oldest child was born in 2007. So all of a sudden I could talk to the head of Common Core. My wife, when our oldest was born, said, I'm the CEO of the baby. And I said, does that make me the unionized workforce you can't fire? So she would say, I'm going to tell you what to do in education. Here's what matters. And I said, well, I just spoke to the head of the person who wrote Common Core for English. And she said, shit, I have to listen to you. The exit that we had with Story Toys, which was a company that went through more perils of Pauline, it was the least of the five major exits that I was exits of tens of millions and 100 million, but it was probably what I was proudest of because it was so damn hard. The company went through 3 near-death experiences and so on, but they actually won on quality. They had to have licenses, but I can tell you why never to be involved in the kids field, and then I can tell you that there is nothing more important you can do. Anyway, another notable exit was Pixelberry because I'd been involved with as a designer doing storytelling names. That sold to Nexon and actually has continued. In around 2018, 2019, to paraphrase Gordon, I decided, after having been out of the startup business for 15, 16 years, I decided that I was going to do another one because it was an opportunity to work with Ralph Koster on Playable Worlds. I did look in the mirror and said, who wants to do a startup? Whose idea was it to do a startup at this advanced stage? And then looked in the mirror and realized I was the idiot who decided to do it. And I knew going in that my entrepreneurial muscles had atrophied. It's just like my design muscles atrophied from being a game designer. And I'm grateful that the people I made a series of mistakes all over again on 2019, 2020 have either forgiven me or haven't said anything in public. What I'm most interested in now is, in terms of the next trend, is in the 90s, we all said at the CDDC, games are going to be a mass medium. And they have become a mass medium. But as I said to the executive chairman of Playdom when he said, Eric, I know your dirty little secret. which is that you don't like to play games. I said, no, I don't like to play the games we do. And the problem is that the games I still want to play are not mostly the games that are the single most popular in the world. But the thing that I'm fascinated about, which goes back to why I did, which was a benefit of EdTech and Kids Hubs, is just watching the way that kids have changed, that our audience of game players games have changed, but I think there's an important thing, but the way that people grew up. There is a Canadian psychologist named Don Tapscott who wrote a book called Growing Up Digital, and then 12 years later, Grown Up Digital. The second one was written in 2008, so they describe a world that doesn't exist. But he pointed out that the way that kids work, the way that, for instance, that within 3 or 4 years, the way that kids think and work changes. So Noah's 1.5-year-old grandchild would be rather different than if his oldest sister were 5.5. They would be of a completely different generation. And watching, if you will, Homo screenus, or whatever you want to call it, evolve, they are changing the ways that the game form occurs. For example, when we grew up, games were things that we interact with each other, we play with each other. Starting about 5-10 years ago, people started watching games. It changes completely. It's creating a whole new generation of games where people are passively absorbing games or are in middle states and so on. And that to me is one of the most interesting things, to watch this new generation who's going to change the games we have now are the games we have now that I don't particularly want to play, are games that are going to change, and they're not going to recognize what people are playing in 5 to 10 years. And to bring it full circle, sort of like Don's baseball story, in 1985, I did a game called Tales of the Arabian Nights, which was the first game to show you could do replayable storytelling games. The sequel is coming out later this year. I figured out if the next sequel takes 39 years to come out, I'm not going to be around for it. But the idea that I have a board game coming out,
well, your AI will do that.
Thank you. Anyway, Chris?
Before you leave on, just to put a pin on that watching stuff, I'm not sure you guys quite get it sometimes what's going on in that space, but I did a show with Garth Brooks that got 1.7 million people to watch him play Words with Friends with his wife.
Well, I had an experience with somebody I just met at random, and I mentioned that I make games. Oh, I'm really into games, and we had. So, what do you like to play? And he gave me this sort of odd look. So, I don't like to play games. I just watch them, and it just shocked me. But yeah, it's a big deal.
So I know I looked into actually what you did, because Twitch has some of the seminal work on it, and watching how these things are absorbed. But the thing about, you want to play, you want to be part of a decision, and then you want to jump into the game. And switching between media, going from Twitch to actually playing a game, and then trying to bring the audience with you. There's all sorts of dynamics. I would love to.
We should talk more about that, because
we should have more of that conversation.
It's really building a velvet rope that allowed some people inside the rope to play, and that was the whole business model.
And people compete to be the ones who get inside the velvet rope. Anyway, sorry, we could go off. Chris?
The old joke about how do you prevent an Italian from speaking, tie his hands behind his back. And the way you prevent me from speaking is to make me sit down. I have taken a course this century completely different from what you guys have done. I've just gone on this really weird path. And the inspiration for it is a quote from Will Durant that I read many years ago. And with each year, it becomes more, I harmonize with it more and more powerfully. We suspect that when our fires begin to burn low, we shall want the healing peace of uncrowded mountains and spacious fields. After every idea has had its day with us, and we have fought for it not wisely or too well, we in our turn shall tire of the battle, and pass on to the young our thinning fascicle of ideals. Then we shall take to the woods. We shall make friends with the animals. We shall leave the world to stew in its own deviltry, and shall take no further thought of its reform.
Okay, I'm ready to go. I'm good.
Yeah, it's.
He does have a knife.
I'm depressed now.
He's going to charge. He's going to charge at you with that knife. You're not going to sword.
Turn. I can feel it.
Let's see. Actually, before the century started, I mean, when our last exciting episode, I went charging out of the industry waving a sword. I have spent much of the last 30 years actually working on interactive storytelling, and that I initially started. My physics training always asked, "What is the essence of the problem?" And my conclusion was language. You can't have drama without people talking to each other, but we can't do natural language. So my solution was, we'll invent toy languages. We got to create toy languages that are, each one will have to be unique to the story world for which it's created. And so all I needed to do was build a technology that could allow the creation of such languages. And so I went to work on that. And I must say, what I ended up building was really ambitious and really great. I mean, this thing, the way it had hard defined classes of words: actors, props, stages, attributes, quantifiers, and in the system, each one had its own color. So when you wrote the algorithms, the equations were very colorful. And it had its own language. It had an inverse parser to drive it. There was a lot of neat stuff. A lot of really great system tools to make it easier. It was a thing that would lay the algorithm out in a graphical form, and you could wiggle each of the variables and see how it changed the results. Lots of great stuff. Really wonderful technology. Actually, the best part was when you defined a word, you also defined the algorithms for how it actually worked in the world. And so every sentence that was created was self-executing. And so wonderful technology. And I made it so good. I worked on it for like 20 years, and it was so good, so powerful that it was completely incomprehensible and utterly unusable. And so I finally, it took me 20 years, but I finally had the sense to realize I got to walk away from this thing, throw it away, give it up, so I can outdo you on the world's greatest disaster. 20 years of my life was wasted. So, oh well.
Did you have fun doing it?
Yes, I did.
That it wasn't wasted, man.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I learned a lot, and I'm hoping someday, I put records up on it, and I'm hoping someday some people will steal some of the ideas, and it is full of really nice ideas. Anyway, so about 5 years ago, I realized, I'm a failure. Too bad. And I'm getting old, and it's getting harder and harder to write code fast. And, I was doing 100 lines a day, and I could handle it. That was when I was in my 30s, but I was getting down to about 5 or 10 lines a day, and it was getting harder and harder. And so I realized I've got one shot left, and I've got to make this one work. And I'd always wanted to do something about the Arthurian legends. Since the early 80s, I'd wanted to do an Arthurian game. I did one at Atari. It was 8-bit, But I decided, all right, I got to make this work. So I went to work on something. I realized that one of the technologies I built for C-Boot back in '87 was perfectly applicable to this. I expanded it, turbocharged it, so forth, and went to work building my Arthurian story world. And it took about 3 years, and I published it about a year and a half ago on my website.
The conversation continues in episode 2, on interactivity in video game design.